They were born into unimaginable privilege, children of a man who ruled Iraq with absolute power. But history remembers not their birthdays, only their downfall. Two sons groomed for succession, known more for violence than leadership. Three daughters who once lived in palaces, later scattered across foreign capitals. A dynasty that believed it would last 1,000 years ended in a single raid. This is a story of Saddam Hussein's children, Uday, Qusay, Raghad, Rana, Hala, and the rumored son, Ali. Each lived a different life, some hungry for power, others desperate to escape it. Together, their lives trace the rise and fall of a family built on control, fear, and loyalty. From the presidential palaces of Baghdad to exile in Jordan, from positions of absolute authority to unmarked graves, this is the complete story of what happened to the children of one of the 20th century's most feared dictators. To understand the children, one must first understand the structure that created them. Saddam Hussein's family was not merely personal. It was political architecture. Marriage, birth, and blood relations served as instruments of control in a regime where trust was currency and paranoia was survival. Saddam married twice. His first wife, Sajida Talfa, was his cousin and the daughter of his guardian. This union, arranged in 1963, produced 4 children: Uday in 1964, Qusay in 1966, Raghad in 1968, and Rana in 1969. Sajida represented tradition, tribal connection, and the legitimate foundation of Saddam's political dynasty. His second marriage to Samira Shabandar in 1986 was different, a love match that scandalized Baghdad's conservative society. Samira, a divorced mother and former airline hostess, was educated and modern. This union produced Hala in 1972 and, according to persistent but unverified reports, a 6th child named Ali. The household operated under rigid hierarchy. Sajida held the formal position of First Lady while Samira remained in the shadows, her existence acknowledged but never celebrated. The children navigated this complex dynamic, understanding from early ages that family loyalty was not just expected, it was essential for survival. Education came through privilege. The Hussein children attended Baghdad's most exclusive schools, surrounded by bodyguards and insulated from ordinary Iraqi life. They learned multiple languages, traveled abroad, and absorbed the assumption that Iraq belonged to them by birthright. Yet even within this bubble of power, distinct personalities emerged. Uday developed early tendencies toward violence and excess. Qusay showed discipline and strategic thinking. The daughters learned to balance public visibility with personal discretion, understanding that in their father's Iraq, women wielded influence through men. The family's rise paralleled Saddam's ascent through the Ba'ath party hierarchy. By the 1970s, when Saddam consolidated power as Iraq's de facto leader, his children were already marked as the next generation of leadership. The boys were groomed for political succession. The girls were positioned for strategic marriages that would strengthen tribal and political alliances. This system worked for decades. Through the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s and the Gulf War of 1991, the Hussein family maintained cohesion and control. The children understood their roles: Uday as the visible heir, Qusay as the security chief, the daughters as diplomatic assets and symbols of the regime's stability. But absolute power creates its own contradictions. The same system that elevated the Hussein children above ordinary law also trapped them within their father's paranoia. Trust became conditional, love became transactional, and by the 1990s, cracks began appearing in the family structure that had seemed unbreakable. The defection of Raghad and Rana in 1995, fleeing to Jordan with their husbands, marked the first public fracture. Their eventual return in 1996, followed immediately by their husbands' executions, demonstrated that even family bonds could not guarantee safety in Saddam's Iraq. By 2003, when American forces invaded Iraq, the Hussein dynasty was already fragmenting. Uday had fallen from favor due to his erratic behavior. Qusay had emerged as the chosen successor but faced an impossible military situation. The daughters lived under constant surveillance, their loyalties questioned, and their futures uncertain. The American invasion completed what internal contradictions had begun. In 4 months, from March to July 2003, a family that had ruled Iraq for over 2 decades was scattered, killed, or forced into exile. The name Hussein, once synonymous with absolute power, became a liability that would define the survivors' lives for decades to come. This is their story, not the mythology of dictatorship, but the human reality of what happens when a family's private life becomes indistinguishable from state power, and when both collapse simultaneously. Uday Saddam Hussein was born on June 18, 1964, in Baghdad, the first child of Saddam and Sajida Hussein. His birth coincided with his father's rise through the Ba'ath Party ranks, marking him from infancy as the heir apparent to a growing political dynasty. From his earliest years, Uday displayed the temperament that would define his adult life: impulsive, violent, and convinced of his own superiority. Palace staff later recounted incidents of the young Uday torturing animals and bullying other children. These were not childhood phases, but early indicators of a personality shaped by absolute privilege and no meaningful consequences. His education began at Baghdad's most exclusive institutions, where bodyguards ensured his safety and teachers understood that criticism was unwelcome. Uday learned that rules applied to others, not to him. This lesson would prove catastrophic as he matured. By adolescence, Uday had developed interests that alarmed even his father's inner circle. He collected weapons, fast cars, and developed an early appetite for violence that went beyond typical teenage rebellion. Reports from the period describe a young man who understood power only through domination and who viewed other people as objects for his amusement. Uday enrolled at Baghdad College of Medicine in the early 1980s, ostensibly to become a doctor. The choice reflected Saddam's desire to present his eldest son as educated and capable of leadership. The reality was different. University records, later seized by American forces, revealed a student who rarely attended classes but somehow maintained passing grades. Professors understood that failing the president's son was not merely inadvisable, it was dangerous. Uday's graduation in 1985 represented not academic achievement but the complete corruption of Iraq's educational system. His personality during this period crystallized around several key traits: narcissism, unpredictability, and casual cruelty. Former classmates described someone who expected constant attention and reacted violently when denied. He drove expensive cars at dangerous speeds through Baghdad's streets, confident that his father's protection made him untouchable. The combination of intelligence and instability made Uday particularly dangerous. He was not unintelligent. Palace insiders noted his quick grasp of political situations and his ability to manipulate people and circumstances. But these capabilities were undermined by impulsiveness and a complete lack of self-control. After completing his nominal medical education, Uday was positioned for political leadership. His father granted him control over several high-profile organizations: the Iraqi Olympic Committee, the Iraqi Football Association, and eventually a media empire that included newspapers, television stations, and radio networks. The Olympic Committee became Uday's primary vehicle for exercising power and satisfying his violent impulses. Athletes who disappointed him faced imprisonment, torture, and sometimes death. The Iraq national football team, in particular, suffered under his leadership. Players were beaten for missed shots, imprisoned for losses, and tortured for failing to meet his expectations. His media empire served both personal aggrandizement and regime propaganda. Uday used newspapers like Babel and Al-Shabaab to attack his father's enemies while promoting his own image as Iraq's future leader. The content was often crude, combining political threats with personal attacks that embarrassed even Saddam's administration. Through the 1990s, Uday's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was known to appear unannounced at Baghdad nightclubs, selecting women for sexual assault and killing men who objected. His bodyguards carried lists of young women he found attractive who would then be brought to his palaces for his pleasure. The international community began to take notice. Human rights organizations documented cases of rape, murder, and torture directly linked to Uday's activities. His reputation became a liability for Iraq's international relations, particularly as Saddam sought to rebuild connections following the Gulf War. On December 12, 1996, Uday's reign of terror encountered its first serious consequences. While driving through Baghdad's Mansour district, gunmen opened fire on his vehicle. The attack left him severely wounded, with injuries that caused partial paralysis and required extensive medical treatment. The assassination attempt marked a turning point. For the first time in his life, Uday faced physical consequences for his actions. The attack was reportedly carried out by relatives of one of his rape victims, demonstrating that even in Saddam's Iraq, there were limits to what the population would tolerate. His recovery was slow and incomplete. The injuries affected his mobility and, according to palace sources, his sexual function. For someone whose identity was built around physical dominance and sexual conquest, these limitations represented a fundamental blow to his self-image. More importantly, the attack triggered a reassessment within the regime hierarchy. Saddam began to question whether his eldest son was suitable for succession. Uday's inability to protect himself raised doubts about his ability to protect the country. His visible weakness became a liability in a system where strength was the only currency that mattered. The father-son relationship was complex, combining genuine affection with political calculation and increasing disappointment. Saddam had initially favored Uday as his successor, seeing in him the aggression and ruthlessness necessary for political survival in Iraq. But Uday's excesses eventually became counterproductive. His inability to control his impulses made him a diplomatic liability and a security risk. The 1996 assassination attempt confirmed Saddam's growing doubts about his eldest son's fitness for leadership. By the late 1990s, Saddam had effectively transferred succession planning to Qusay, his younger son. Uday retained his official positions but lost access to the most sensitive state functions. This demotion created tension between the brothers and resentment in Uday, who understood that his birthright was slipping away. Their final years together were marked by attempts at reconciliation and continued disappointment. Saddam wanted to love his son but could not ignore the damage Uday caused to the regime's reputation and stability. Uday wanted his father's approval but could not control the impulses that made such approval impossible. On July 22, 2003, American forces received intelligence that Uday and Qusay Hussein were hiding in a house in Mosul. The subsequent raid involved helicopter gunships, explosives, and a 4-hour firefight that ended with both brothers dead. Uday's death marked the end of a life that had been defined by privilege without responsibility, power without restraint, and violence without consequence. At 39, he had never held a job that wasn't given to him by his father, never faced meaningful opposition, and never learned that actions have consequences. His legacy is that of the spoiled dictator's son, whose excesses helped destroy the regime he was supposed to inherit. International observers noted that Uday's behavior had become so notorious that it simplified the case for regime change in Iraq. His reputation for torture, rape, and murder made it difficult for anyone to defend Saddam's government. In death, Uday became a symbol of how absolute power corrupts absolutely. His life demonstrated that privilege without accountability creates monsters, and that even dictatorships cannot survive when their heirs become liabilities rather than assets. The house in Mosul where he died became a tourist attraction for American soldiers and Iraqi civilians eager to see where the tyrant's son had met his end. But for Iraq's population, Uday's death represented not just the end of one man's reign of terror, but the beginning of the end for the entire Hussein dynasty. Qusay Saddam Hussein was born on May 17, 1966, in Baghdad, 2 years after his older brother Uday. From the beginning, Qusay represented everything his brother was not: disciplined, calculating, and capable of long-term strategic thinking. Where Uday sought attention and immediate gratification, Qusay preferred the shadows. He learned early that power was more effectively exercised quietly through control of information and loyalty networks rather than public displays of violence. This fundamental difference in temperament would eventually determine which brother inherited their father's throne. His childhood was spent in the same privileged environment as his siblings, but Qusay approached this privilege differently. He studied his father's methods, observed the regime's internal dynamics, and began developing the skills that would make him Saddam's most trusted lieutenant. Unlike Uday, who viewed rules as obstacles to be overcome, Qusay understood that successful dictatorships required systems and procedures. He learned to work within structures even as he learned to control them. This approach made him simultaneously more effective and less visible than his theatrical older brother. Qusay's education followed the same privileged path as his siblings, but he approached it with characteristic seriousness. He studied engineering at Baghdad University, completing his degree with respectable grades that reflected actual effort rather than political pressure. His real education, however, took place within the regime's security apparatus. From his teenage years, Qusay was given access to intelligence briefings, security meetings, and the inner workings of his father's government. He learned to read people, assess threats, and understand the delicate balance of fear and loyalty that kept the regime in power. Former intelligence officials later noted Qusay's remarkable ability to absorb and retain information. He maintained detailed mental files on thousands of officials, their relationships, their weaknesses, and their potential for betrayal. This knowledge became his primary source of power within the regime. His personality during this period was marked by self-control and strategic thinking. Where Uday acted on impulse, Qusay planned carefully. Where Uday sought immediate pleasure, Qusay focused on long-term advantage. These differences did not go unnoticed by their father, who began to see in his younger son the qualities necessary for political survival. Qusay's formal career began in the mid-1980s when he was appointed to positions within Iraq's security establishment. Unlike his brother's public roles in sports and media, Qusay's responsibilities were deliberately kept from public view. He oversaw internal security, intelligence operations, and the regime's most sensitive activities. His most significant appointment came in the 1990s, when he was placed in charge of the Special Security Organization, Iraq's most elite intelligence service. This position gave him authority over presidential security, counterintelligence, and the protection of the regime's most critical assets, including weapons programs and financial resources. Under Qusay's leadership, the Special Security Organization became the regime's most effective institution. He recruited based on competence rather than just loyalty, maintained strict operational security, and developed sophisticated methods for detecting and eliminating threats to the government. His approach to power was methodical and comprehensive. Rather than relying on fear alone, Qusay built networks of obligation and mutual dependence. He rewarded effectiveness, punished failure, and maintained enough distance from day-to-day operations to avoid direct blame when things went wrong. By the late 1990s, Qusay had effectively become Iraq's second most powerful person. He controlled access to his father, managed the regime's most sensitive operations, and had begun preparing for eventual succession. His rise represented a triumph of competence over birthright as he surpassed his older brother through superior performance rather than hereditary privilege. When American forces invaded Iraq in March 2003, Qusay became the regime's primary coordinator of defense. He oversaw military operations, managed communication between different defense units, and maintained the command structure as traditional governmental institutions collapsed. His performance during this period demonstrated both his capabilities and the impossible situation the regime faced. Qusay organized more effective resistance than many observers expected, coordinating between regular army units, Republican Guard forces, and irregular militias. He maintained operational security and prevented the complete collapse of organized resistance. However, the fundamental military imbalance made victory impossible. American technological superiority, particularly in air power and intelligence gathering, neutralized many of Qusay's organizational advantages. The swift collapse of Iraqi conventional forces left him commanding a resistance that was brave but ultimately futile. During the final weeks of the regime, Qusay remained loyal to his father and the system that had shaped his entire life. He rejected opportunities to negotiate surrender or defection, choosing instead to fight until the end. This decision reflected both personal loyalty and his realistic assessment that there would be no place for him in post-Saddam Iraq. His management of the regime's final days earned grudging respect even from his enemies. Unlike many Iraqi officials who fled or surrendered immediately, Qusay maintained his positions and responsibilities until the government's complete collapse. Qusay married Sahar Abd al-Rashid in 1988, a union that reflected both personal preference and political advantage. Sahar came from a respected family with connections to Iraq's military establishment, making the marriage useful for building alliances within the officer corps. The couple had 3 sons, Mustafa, Yahya, and Yusuf. Qusay approached fatherhood with the same methodical planning he applied to his political responsibilities. He ensured his children received excellent education while protecting them from the public attention that had proved problematic for his brother. His family life was notably stable compared to the chaos that surrounded his brother. Qusay maintained traditional marriage arrangements, avoided public scandals, and presented an image of respectability that served the regime's public relations needs. The children were raised with an understanding of their privileged position, but also with expectations of discipline and achievement. Qusay wanted them prepared for leadership responsibilities while avoiding the sense of entitlement that had corrupted his older brother. His relationship with his wife and children provided one of the few areas of genuine personal satisfaction in a life otherwise dedicated to political survival and regime maintenance. The father-son relationship between Saddam and Qusay represented the regime's ideal of professional competence combined with personal loyalty. Unlike the complicated dynamic with Uday, this relationship was built on mutual respect and shared understanding of political necessity. Saddam came to rely on Qusay for the regime's most sensitive operations. He trusted his younger son's judgment, valued his strategic thinking, and gradually transferred more authority to him as Uday's behavior became increasingly problematic. By the early 2000s, Qusay had clearly emerged as the designated successor. This transition was managed carefully to avoid family conflict while ensuring continuity of leadership. Saddam began including Qusay in the most sensitive decision-making processes and giving him authority over previously restricted areas. Their relationship was not without tension. Qusay sometimes disagreed with his father's decisions, particularly regarding international relations and economic policy. However, he expressed these disagreements privately and ultimately deferred to paternal authority. The succession planning was never formally announced, but was understood throughout the regime hierarchy. Officials began cultivating relationships with Qusay as the future leader while maintaining loyalty to Saddam as the current president. Qusay died alongside his brother Uday on July 22, 2003, in the firefight with American forces in Mosul. His death marked the end of the Hussein family's male lineage and the final collapse of succession planning that had taken decades to develop. His legacy differs significantly from his brother's. Where Uday is remembered for excess and brutality, Qusay is recalled as competent and professional. Even his enemies acknowledged his organizational abilities and strategic thinking. Former intelligence officials noted that Qusay had been the regime's most effective component in its final years. His death removed the person most capable of organizing post-invasion resistance and most likely to have maintained some form of organized opposition to the new government. His approach to power, methodical, strategic, and based on competence rather than fear, represented what the Hussein regime might have become under different circumstances. However, his loyalty to the system that created him made adaptation impossible when that system faced existential threats. In death, Qusay became a symbol of competent authoritarianism brought down by external force rather than internal contradiction. His life demonstrated that even effective dictatorship could not survive in a changed international environment where technological advantages made traditional power structures obsolete. Raghad Saddam Hussein was born on September 2, 1968, in Baghdad, the first daughter of Saddam and Sajida Hussein. Her birth brought a different dynamic to the Hussein family hierarchy. She would never inherit power directly, but she could serve as a bridge between the regime and important tribal or political alliances through strategic marriage. Her education followed the pattern established for elite Iraqi women: excellent schooling, university education, and preparation for a role that combined public visibility with carefully managed political influence. Raghad studied psychology at Baghdad University, completing her degree in 1990 with genuine academic achievement that contrasted with her brother's more complicated educational experiences. In 1983, at age 15, Raghad was married to Hussein Kamel al-Majid, her cousin and one of Saddam's most trusted lieutenants. The marriage represented more than personal union. It was a political alliance that strengthened Saddam's control over his inner circle while providing Hussein Kamel with unshakable family connections to the president. Hussein Kamel was a rising star in the regime, eventually becoming Minister of Industry and Military Industrialization with responsibility for Iraq's weapons programs. The marriage gave Raghad access to state secrets and political influence that few women in Iraq could match. The couple had 5 children together, creating a new generation of the Hussein dynasty while cementing the political alliance between Saddam and one of his most capable subordinates. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, Raghad lived the privileged existence of Iraq's unofficial first princess. She had access to luxury goods, international travel, and social circles that included Iraq's political elite and wealthy business families. Her role was carefully managed to serve the regime's public relations needs. She appeared at state functions, supported women's organizations, and presented an image of modern Iraqi womanhood that served the government's claims about social progress and women's rights. Behind this public facade, Raghad was increasingly aware of the regime's brutality and her family's growing isolation. She witnessed the paranoia that consumed her father, the violence that characterized her brother Uday's behavior, and the international pressure that was slowly strangling Iraq. Her marriage to Hussein Kamel provided her with detailed knowledge of Iraq's weapons programs, including chemical and biological weapons development. This information would later prove crucial when the couple decided to defect, as it represented valuable intelligence for Iraq's enemies. By the mid-1990s, Raghad was living in a gilded cage. Her privilege was absolute within Iraq's borders, but she understood that this privilege was built on foundations that were rapidly eroding. On August 8, 1995, Raghad and her sister Rana, along with their husbands Hussein Kamel and Saddam Kamel, fled Iraq for Jordan. The defection was carefully planned and executed, taking advantage of Hussein Kamel's knowledge of security procedures and border controls. The motivations for defection were complex. Hussein Kamel had grown increasingly concerned about his position within the regime, fearing that Saddam's paranoia would eventually target him despite their family connection. The international pressure on Iraq was intensifying, and the couple saw limited prospects for the regime's long-term survival. King Hussein of Jordan granted them asylum, recognizing both the humanitarian obligations and the potential intelligence value of such high-profile defectors. The Jordanian government provided security and diplomatic protection while facilitating their contact with international intelligence services. The defection created an international sensation. Western media portrayed it as evidence of the regime's internal collapse, while intelligence agencies saw an unprecedented opportunity to gather information about Iraq's weapons programs and internal political dynamics. Raghad found herself in the unusual position of being simultaneously Iraq's most famous exile and one of its most valuable intelligence assets. Her knowledge of palace life, family dynamics, and state secrets made her a priority target for debriefing by multiple intelligence services. The exile in Jordan lasted only 6 months. In February 1996, the couples announced their intention to return to Iraq, claiming they had been misled by Western intelligence services and expressing loyalty to Saddam and Iraq. The return was facilitated by personal guarantees from Saddam himself, who publicly welcomed his daughters and their husbands back to Iraq. International observers noted the propaganda value of the return for the regime, which portrayed it as evidence that even defectors recognized the futility of opposing Saddam. However, the return quickly turned tragic. Within 3 days of their arrival in Baghdad, Hussein Kamel and Saddam Kamel were killed in a firefight with Iraqi security forces. The official account claimed they had died resisting arrest for treason, but most observers understood this as execution disguised as combat. Raghad and Rana were widowed, their children made fatherless, and their positions within the family hierarchy fundamentally altered. They had returned as prodigal daughters only to discover that their husband's defection was unforgivable, regardless of family connections. The tragedy demonstrated the limits of even family loyalty in Saddam's Iraq. Blood relationships could provide protection, but they could not guarantee survival for those who had crossed fundamental red lines. After the 2003 American invasion and the fall of her father's regime, Raghad again fled to Jordan. This time, the exile was permanent and protective rather than temporary and strategic. King Abdullah II granted her asylum, continuing the Jordanian tradition of providing refuge for displaced Arab elites. Her life in Jordan has been carefully managed to balance humanitarian protection with political neutrality. She lives under Jordanian government security, her movements monitored, and her public statements carefully controlled. Raghad has used her exile to attempt rehabilitation of her father's legacy. She has given select interviews portraying Saddam as a patriotic leader who was misunderstood by the international community. These efforts have had limited success, given the overwhelming evidence of the regime's brutality. Her children have been educated in Jordan and other Arab countries, raised with knowledge of their grandfather's legacy, but positioned to build independent lives away from the Hussein name's toxic associations. Raghad's relationship with her father was complex, combining genuine affection with political calculation and periods of painful separation. Saddam valued his daughters as diplomatic assets and symbols of family stability, but he was willing to sacrifice their personal happiness for political advantage. The defection and return episode tested this relationship to its limits. Saddam publicly forgave his daughters while privately punishing their husbands with death. This separation of family love from political necessity reflected the impossible contradictions of life in a dictatorship. In her post-2003 interviews, Raghad has consistently defended her father's memory while acknowledging that she disagreed with some of his decisions. She portrays him as a loving father who was forced into difficult positions by external pressures and internal enemies. Raghad's legacy is that of a woman caught between loyalty and survival, family bonds, and political reality. Her life illustrates how dictatorship corrupts even the most intimate relationships, making love conditional on political loyalty and turning family members into political assets. Her survival, unlike her brother's, reflects both her gender's different relationship to political power and her ability to navigate between competing loyalties. She represents the human cost of dictatorship, not just for its victims, but for the dictator's own family. In exile, she has become a symbol of the Hussein dynasty's attempt at rehabilitation. Her efforts to defend her father's legacy serve as a reminder that political systems create loyal supporters, even among those who suffer under them. Rana Saddam Hussein was born on March 6, 1969, in Baghdad, the youngest daughter of Saddam and Sajida Hussein. Her birth came during a period of consolidation for the Ba'ath Party and her father's rise to unquestioned leadership, marking her entry into a world where political power and family identity were inseparable. As the second daughter, Rana occupied a unique position within the Hussein family hierarchy. She was neither the heir apparent like her brothers, nor the first daughter like Raghad. This position allowed her a degree of freedom from immediate political expectations while still requiring her to serve the regime's broader strategic needs. Her childhood was spent in the same privileged environment as her siblings, with access to the best education, international travel, and luxury goods. However, Rana displayed a personality that was more reserved and compliant than her older siblings, characteristics that would prove both protective and limiting throughout her life. She learned early that her value to the family lay in her potential for strategic marriage and her ability to present a positive image of the Hussein dynasty to both domestic and international audiences. Rana pursued higher education at Baghdad University, where she studied literature and languages. Her academic performance was respectable, reflecting genuine effort rather than the political considerations that influenced her brother's educational experiences. Her personality was marked by intelligence, caution, and a deep understanding of the political constraints that shaped her life. Unlike her brother Uday, who rebelled against limitations, or Raghad, who sought to maximize her influence, Rana accepted her circumstances while working quietly within them. Former palace staff described her as the most approachable member of the Hussein family, capable of normal human interactions despite her privileged position. This quality made her useful for diplomatic and social functions where the regime needed to present a human face. Her language skills and cultural sophistication prepared her for the international role she would eventually play, though neither she nor her family anticipated that this role would involve exile and political advocacy rather than diplomatic representation. In 1989, Rana married Saddam Kamel al-Majid, the younger brother of her sister Raghad's husband, Hussein Kamel. This marriage maintained the pattern of keeping political alliances within an extended family network while ensuring that both daughters remained connected to their father's inner circle. Saddam Kamel held important positions within the regime's security apparatus, though he was less prominent than his older brother. The marriage provided Rana with status and security while giving her husband enhanced access to presidential favor through family connection. The couple had children together, creating another generation of the Hussein dynasty, while cementing political alliances between different branches of the extended family. Their household represented the ideal of Ba'ath Party elite life, wealthy, modern, and completely loyal to Saddam's leadership. Rana's role as wife and mother was carefully managed to serve the regime's public relations needs. She appeared at state functions, supported women's organizations, and demonstrated that Iraqi women could be both traditional and modern under Ba'ath Party rule. Rana's life changed dramatically on August 8, 1995, when she joined her sister Raghad and their husbands in defecting to Jordan. The decision was made collectively by the two couples who feared for their safety as Saddam's paranoia intensified and international pressure on Iraq increased. The defection placed Rana in an impossible position. She was simultaneously a refugee seeking protection and a valuable intelligence asset with detailed knowledge of the regime's inner workings. Her compliance and caution, which had served her well within the Iraqi system, made her a reliable source for Western intelligence services. During the 6 months in Jordan, Rana experienced a different kind of life, one where her identity was not predetermined by her father's political position. However, this freedom came with uncertainty and fear about the future, both for herself and for family members who remained in Iraq. The decision to return to Iraq in February 1996 was made collectively with her sister and their husbands, based on personal guarantees from Saddam and promises of reconciliation. Rana understood the risks but felt obligated to prioritize family loyalty over personal safety. The return to Iraq quickly became a nightmare. Within 3 days, both Saddam Kamel and Hussein Kamel were killed in what was officially described as a firefight but was clearly an execution. Rana was widowed, her children made fatherless, and her position within the family fundamentally altered. The loss demonstrated that even family connections could not guarantee safety in Saddam's Iraq. The defection had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, regardless of subsequent expressions of loyalty and regret. Rana's widowhood placed her in a category of political vulnerability. She had knowledge of state secrets, experience with foreign intelligence services, and personal reasons to resent the regime that had killed her husband. These factors made her both valuable and dangerous from the perspective of state security. Her life after 1996 was marked by surveillance, isolation, and careful management by the regime. She was allowed to raise her children and maintain a household, but her movements were monitored and her contacts controlled. Rana's relationship with her father was complicated by the tragedy of her husband's death and her own complicity in the defection that precipitated it. Saddam maintained the facade of paternal love while ensuring that she posed no threat to regime security. She understood that her survival depended on demonstrating absolute loyalty while accepting the loss of her husband as a necessary sacrifice for the regime's stability. This psychological burden was enormous, requiring her to publicly forgive the man who had ordered her husband's death. In interviews conducted after 2003, family members described Rana as deeply affected by these contradictions. She loved her father, but could not forget that his political calculations had destroyed her marriage and her children's future. Rana represents the cost of dictatorship for those within the dictator's own family. Her life illustrates how political systems can destroy the most intimate relationships while demanding continued loyalty from those they have harmed. Her survival, like her sister's, reflects both the different expectations placed on women within authoritarian systems and her own ability to navigate impossible circumstances. She found ways to protect herself and her children while living with the knowledge that family love and political necessity could be deadly competitors. In the aftermath of the regime's collapse, Rana has maintained a lower profile than her sister Raghad. She has chosen survival over advocacy, privacy over public defense of her father's legacy. This choice reflects both wisdom and the lasting trauma of a life spent balancing love and terror within the same family structure. Hala Saddam Hussein was born in 1972, the daughter of Saddam Hussein and his second wife, Samira Shahbandar. Her birth came during a period when her father had consolidated absolute power in Iraq, but it also marked her as different from her half-siblings, the product of a love match rather than a political alliance. Her position as the youngest child and daughter of the second wife created a unique dynamic within the Hussein family. She was simultaneously privileged and marginalized, loved by her father, but operating within a family structure that prioritized the children of the first marriage for political purposes. Hala's childhood was spent largely away from public attention. Where her older siblings were groomed for specific roles within the regime, she was protected from political responsibilities and allowed a degree of normalcy that was there within the Hussein household. This protection was both blessing and limitation. She avoided the pressure and scrutiny that affected her siblings, but she also lacked the political connections and power base that might have provided security when the regime collapsed. Hala received an excellent education, attending Baghdad's most exclusive schools and later pursuing higher education abroad. Her academic experiences were more genuinely educational than those of her siblings, as her father was less concerned with her political preparation than with her personal development. She displayed intelligence and cultural sophistication, developing interests in literature, art, and languages that reflected genuine intellectual curiosity rather than political calculation. These qualities made her the most privately educated member of the Hussein family. Her personality was marked by reserve and discretion. Former family associates described her as thoughtful and careful, someone who understood the political implications of her position but preferred to remain in the background rather than seeking attention or influence. This approach served her well within a family where visibility often brought danger. By maintaining a low profile, Hala avoided the conflicts and pressures that affected her more prominent siblings. Hala married Jamal Mustafa Abdullah al-Sultan, a senior Ba'ath Party official who held important positions within the regime's administrative structure. The marriage combined personal preference with political advantage, though it was less strategically central than her half-sisters' marriages. Jamal Mustafa's positions within the party hierarchy provided the couple with status and security while keeping them somewhat removed from the most sensitive political operations. This distance proved protective during the regime's final years when paranoia affected those closest to power. The couple maintained a household that reflected Ba'ath Party elite values, educated, modern, and completely loyal to Saddam's leadership. However, they avoided the excess and visibility that made other family members targets for criticism and eventual retaliation. Their marriage was characterized by stability and mutual respect, contrasting with the more complicated relationships that affected other Hussein family members. This stability provided Hala with emotional security during increasingly turbulent political times. When American forces invaded Iraq in 2003, Hala faced the same existential crisis as the rest of the Hussein family. Her comfortable life as a privileged member of the political elite ended immediately, replaced by the need for physical survival and political adaptation. Her husband, Jamal Mustafa, was arrested by American forces and held for several years as a high-value detainee. His capture left Hala in a precarious position, connected to the fallen regime through family and marriage, but lacking the resources or connections to ensure her protection. Unlike her half-sisters, who fled to Jordan where they received royal protection, Hala's options were more limited. Her lower profile within the regime hierarchy meant she had fewer international contacts and less obvious value as either an intelligence asset or a diplomatic bargaining chip. Following the regime's collapse, Hala essentially disappeared from public view. Reports suggest she may have left Iraq, possibly residing in one of the Gulf states or elsewhere in the Middle East, but her exact whereabouts and circumstances remain unknown. This invisibility represents both survival strategy and personal preference. Unlike Raghad, who has used exile to advocate for her father's legacy, Hala has chosen complete withdrawal from public life and political activity. Her husband, Jamal Mustafa, was eventually released from American custody in 2020 after serving nearly 2 decades in prison. Reports suggest they may have reunited, but details about their current life remain private and unconfirmed. Hala's relationship with her father appears to have been the most genuinely affectionate within the Hussein family. As the youngest daughter and product of his love marriage, she represented his personal happiness rather than his political calculations. Saddam reportedly was protective of Hala, shielding her from the political pressures and expectations that affected her siblings. This protection allowed her to develop as an individual rather than as a political asset, creating the foundation for her later ability to survive independently. Their relationship was not burdened by the political complications that affected his relationships with his other children. She neither sought power like her brothers, nor faced the impossible loyalty tests that tragic consequences for her half-sisters. Hala's legacy is one of successful invisibility within a family defined by its visibility. Her ability to remain private and protected throughout the regime's rise and fall demonstrates that survival sometimes requires choosing obscurity over influence. She represents the possibility of escape from the cycles of violence and political calculation that destroyed other family members. Her life suggests that even within dictatorial systems, some individuals can find ways to preserve their humanity and independence. In the context of the Hussein family story, Hala serves as a reminder that not all of Saddam's children were consumed by the system that created them. Her survival and continued privacy represent a form of victory over the political forces that destroyed the rest of her family's legacy. The story of Ali, Saddam Hussein's alleged sixth child, emerged from persistent reports about a secret marriage and hidden family that paralleled the dictator's public life. According to these accounts, Samira Shah Bandar, Saddam's second wife, gave birth to a son named Ali sometime in the late 1980s or early 1990s. The rumors gained credibility from their specificity and the known pattern of Saddam's family life. He had already broken social conventions by taking a second wife, and maintaining additional secret relationships would have been consistent with both his personality and his political needs for compartmentalization. Various sources, including defectors from the regime and international intelligence reports, have referenced Ali's existence. However, none of these sources provided definitive proof, creating a mystery that has persisted for decades without resolution. The secrecy surrounding Ali's alleged existence would have served multiple purposes: protecting him from the political pressures that affected his confirmed siblings, maintaining operational security for Saddam's personal life, and creating flexibility for future political arrangements. Media coverage of Ali's existence has been inconsistent and contradictory. Some reports describe him as living abroad under an assumed identity, educated in European universities, and completely separated from Iraqi politics. Other accounts suggest he remained in Iraq but was hidden within extended family networks. Intelligence agencies have neither confirmed nor definitively disproven his existence. The lack of concrete evidence reflects either successful security procedures that protected his identity, or the possibility that the entire story is fabrication created by the regime's enemies or supporters for their own purposes. Family members who have spoken publicly since 2003 have not acknowledged Ali's existence. This silence could indicate loyalty to promises of secrecy, genuine ignorance of his existence, or confirmation that he never existed at all. The contradictory nature of the accounts makes independent verification nearly impossible. Without access to regime archives or testimony from those closest to Saddam's personal life, Ali's existence remains a matter of speculation rather than confirmed fact. If Ali exists, his life would represent a unique experiment in escaping the burden of the Hussein name. Unlike his confirmed siblings, he would have been raised with knowledge of his heritage, but without the public responsibilities and dangers that defined their lives. This separation could have provided him with opportunities unavailable to his siblings: normal education, genuine relationships, and the possibility of building an independent identity separate from his father's political legacy. The secrecy that protected him during the regime's existence would continue to serve him after its collapse. While his confirmed siblings faced death, exile, or constant surveillance, a hidden son could potentially live freely under an assumed identity. However, the same secrecy that might protect him also makes his story impossible to verify. Without confirmation from family members or documentary evidence, Ali remains a ghost in the Hussein family history. Regardless of his actual existence, Ali has become a symbol of the mysteries that surround dictatorial families. His story represents the possibility that even the most documented and scrutinized political dynasties maintain secrets that outlive their power. The persistence of the rumors reflects the public fascination with hidden aspects of authoritarian rule. People want to believe that even dictators maintain private lives that escape political calculation and public scrutiny. For Iraq's population, Ali's alleged existence serves as a reminder that the Hussein legacy may include elements that remain unknown and unpunished. The possibility that a son escaped the consequences faced by his siblings creates both hope and anxiety about unresolved aspects of the past. In the broader context of the Hussein family story, Ali represents the ultimate expression of the contradiction between public power and private life that defines Saddam's approach to family relationships. 20 years have passed since American forces invaded Iraq and shattered the Hussein dynasty forever. The family that once ruled absolutely over 25 million people now exists only in exile, memory, and the occasional diplomatic controversy. The immediate aftermath was swift and brutal. Saddam Hussein was captured in December 2003, hiding in a hole near his hometown of Tikrit. His trial and execution in 2006 marked the formal end of his personal rule, but by then his family's political relevance had already been destroyed. Uday and Qusay, the sons groomed for succession, died in Mosul 4 months after the invasion. Their deaths eliminated the male lineage and ended any possibility of dynastic continuation. The brothers who had competed for their father's favor were united only in death, killed in the same raid by the same foreign forces they had been raised to resist. The surviving daughters face different fates but share the common burden of carrying a toxic name in a changed world. Raghad remains in Jordan, protected by royal hospitality but limited by international sanctions and the constant suspicion of intelligence services. Her attempts to rehabilitate her father's legacy have found little resonance in a region that has moved beyond the era of secular Arab nationalism that Saddam represented. Rana has chosen a different path, embracing obscurity and focusing on the practical challenges of survival rather than the political project of historical revision. Her silence speaks to the trauma of a woman who lost her husband to her father's paranoia and learned that family love could be more dangerous than enemy hatred. Hala, the youngest and most successful in escaping public attention, represents the possibility of genuine freedom from the Hussein legacy. Her continued invisibility suggests that sometimes the most effective resistance to historical burden is complete withdrawal from the forces that created it. The grandchildren, now adults, face the challenge of defining themselves in relation to a legacy they cannot escape but did not create. Some have embraced their grandfather's memory, others have sought to build entirely new identities. All must navigate a world where their family name opens some doors while permanently closing others. The Hussein name itself has become a historical artifact studied by academics and remembered by those who lived through the era it defined. For Iraqis, it represents both the brutality of dictatorship and the stability that some now nostalgically recall in contrast to the chaos that followed. The international community treats the surviving family members as remnants of a system that must be prevented from returning rather than as individuals deserving of normal diplomatic consideration. This perpetual suspicion ensures that the Hussein dynasty's political death will outlast the biological death of its members. The broader lesson of the Hussein family's rise and fall lies in the contradiction between personal relationships and political power. Saddam created a system where love was subordinated to loyalty, where family bonds served state purposes, and where even children became instruments of rule rather than objects of protection. This system produced children who were simultaneously privileged and trapped, powerful and vulnerable, loved and monitored. Their individual stories illustrate how dictatorship corrupts even the most intimate relationships while creating dependencies that make escape nearly impossible. The dynasty's end came not from internal rebellion but from external force, demonstrating that even successful authoritarianism cannot survive in a world where technological advantages and international coalition building can overwhelm traditional sources of political power. In Death and Exile, the Hussein family serves as a reminder that political systems built on fear and control contain the seeds of their own destruction. Their story is not tragedy in the classical sense. The consequences were too predictable and the suffering too widespread for that. But it is a complete illustration of how absolute power creates the conditions for absolute downfall. The Hussein name will outlive its carriers, preserved in history books and documentary films like this one. But the dynasty itself ended in a house in Mosul, when the last shots were fired and the final chapter of an impossible family was written in blood and silence.